Doesn't it look like I have like a creature running around inside my shirt on my shoulders, like a ferret or like a little mole or something? Sorry, um, I'm having fun with this. Anyway, I'm home again. Kid's doing okay. He got pretty dehydrated yesterday, so we took him to emergency room on the recommendation of the nurse line because he hadn't been able to keep any water down. Keep any water down. So anyway, after a little time in the emergency room, got him hydrated again, and so he's back and he's doing okay. But we're moving in the right direction. I'm glad it's Friday. And as you can see, I'm having my own whole set of issues here. Um, that looks gross. It's like anyway. Um, we're gonna do a couple things with this. I'm gonna try something a little bit new because I'm gonna have you guys do a little bit of work in the middle of my little lecture here. So if everyone could just take their packets out, I will give you a moment to do that while I will just entertain myself with the webcam. Okay, now, so everyone open up to page 81. So what I'm going to have you guys do first is you're just going to be looking at pages 81 to 83. Okay, and when I get done kind of setting this up, I'm just going to have the substitute push pause on the YouTube video for about between 5 and 10 minutes, however much time. If people are still working, then go up to 10. If people seem like they're done, then just give them about 5. We'll discuss that on Monday, but this is kind of working with the symbol, and I want to keep, trying to make you do as much of the finding of information and the analyzing of information as you can. So to just have you do that. So here's what I'm going to have you do in your groups, and I would have your packets open. I think this is useful stuff to write down, whether you're writing about symbols or just how he changes or whatever. But this is a big important part of the duck symbol. So what I'm going to have you do first is look for the context, right? And in a group, group of no more than 3 people, you're going to first write down what's going on with Holden before he gets in the cab and starts asking about the ducks again, right? It's always important with these symbols to give the context of what's going on, either with what had just happened to him or what he's thinking about or what he's feeling, because usually that's important in terms of what the symbol means. So write down the context, sentence or 2 about what's going on with him, and then I want you to write down when he brings this up and how this conversation and knowing what we do with the symbol of the ducks in here, how this shows us something about Holden, right? So if he hadn't brought this information up, he would be one way, but he did, right? So there's some change which is taking place in him, and this helps demonstrate that. Okay, so symbols are useful because then authors don't need to say, so here's a place where the character changes a little bit, or here's the place where the character realizes something, because that's not very good writing. But instead of doing that, if they have a symbol, then through use of that symbol, then we draw the conclusion as to the point author's making. Okay, so that's what I'm going to have you do, and I want you to write, I don't know, get a couple of those quotes down about the important things he takes from this, sum up what's important about the scene, and as a symbol, how this helps show change in Holden, what he either figures out or why this is important to him, right? So I'm going to ask the sub now to push pause. Unfortunately, my webcam will not allow me to push pause, so what's going to happen when I ask the sub to push pause is I'm just going to stare blankly at the screen for about 5 to 10 seconds. So during that time, push pause, and then when you are done with the activity, just push play again, and I will still be talking. Please push pause. Okay. Thank you for doing that. Hang on to that stuff. We will go over that on Monday. Again, I just want to keep pushing you guys to do more of the work. All right, open up to 84, please. Some things I want to talk about. Music comes up a couple times in this book, and that might be something worth noting too. Musicians who play and try to show off and do it for praise and adulation, he dislikes. He thinks they're phony. Right? People who make music for themselves or just because they like to do it, as Holden is kind of with everything he does, those are the people he thinks are authentic and good. So we had, and I forgot to mention this when we talked about it, but during the Stradlater section, it had talked about what a terrible whistler he was, and he always picks these really hard songs to whistle, and he can never do it, and that really annoyed him. And I can't find it right now, but here we go on page 27. It says, Stradlater kept whistling Song of India while he shaved. He had one of those very piercing whistles that are practically never in tune, and he always picked out some song that's hard to whistle even if you're a good whistler, like Song of India or Slaughter on 10th Avenue. He could really mess that song up. We're going to come back to the whistling idea because whistling is going to come up again a little bit later. But with this music idea on page 84, he's talking about this piano player, Ernie, and he talked about putting all these dumb show-offy ripples on the high notes, and a lot of other very tricky stuff gives me a pain in the ass. You should have heard the crowd when he finished, though. He would have puked. And partially this, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of you remember when we talked about how Ackley viewed basketball and how Stradlater viewed writing? I think Holden's doing a little bit of that here. Like he's talking about, he's not acknowledging that this guy's a really good piano player. He's just talking about, he's just doing it to show off. Which, again, kind of takes him not quite off the hook in the same way that Ackley and Stradlater in that conversation did, but a similar idea. Going on 85, so he's sitting there and he's surrounded, you know, for Holden, who is not overly popular, to see all these dudes with dates around him, and then Holden's kind of listening to what they're talking about and analyzing the things he's saying, and he's really annoyed with all the dudes around him. And I think mostly this is just due to jealousy that he's not on a date. It said on page 85, I'm surrounded by jerks, I'm not kidding. He gave her every single play of the whole game. I'm not kidding. He was the most boring guy I ever listened to. And you could tell his date wasn't even interested in the game, but she was even funnier looking than he was, so I guess she had to listen. The ugly girls have it tough, so I feel sorry for them sometimes. And then he kind of starts ranting about the other guys. Other guys around him on page 86, one guy was, in the first place, they were both slightly crocked. What he was doing is he were giving her a feel under the table, at the same time telling her all about some guy in this dorm who had eaten a whole bottle of aspirin and nearly committed suicide. His date kept saying to him, how horrible, don't, darling, please don't, not here. Imagine giving somebody a feel and telling them about a guy committing suicide at the same time. It killed me. So, all these guys who don't deserve to be on dates, according to Holden, he's kind of, ranting about them a little bit. And then he runs into Lillian Simmons on page 86, 87. And I'm going to have the substitute push pause in a moment here, just for a couple minutes. And what I'm going to have you do on 86, 87, this would be some good stuff to write down. I want you to write down why this conversation is so bothersome to him, right? I want you to look at the things she calls him and the things she talks about, right? Because we go right from here, this section and this little scene, to almost right after this is when he gets the prostitute, and I think these two scenes are related. So in a moment, I'm just going to ask the sub to push pause for a couple minutes, 5 minutes or so, depending on how long people take. I want you to jot down some quotes and explain why this leads him to moving in the direction of hiring prostitute. So sub, please push pause, and I'm going to stare blankly at the camera for 5 seconds or so. When students are done working, just push play again. Thank you. We're doing that. All right, now go forward, please. 88, 89. So he feels pretty badly after that scene. And then he feels worse as he's going. And on page 88, we get a little bit of the hat showing up again here. This would be a good quote if you're writing about the hat. You'd hardly known it snowed at all. There was hardly any snow on the sidewalks, but it was freezing cold. I took out my red hunting hat out of my pocket and put it on. I didn't give a damn how I looked. I even put the ear flaps down. I wish I knew who'd swipe my gloves with pencil because my hands are freezing. So he does wear it here, but if you notice, the reason that he doesn't care what anyone thinks about him is because there's no one around, right? And so maybe this shows a little bit of change in that he is wearing it out in public, but he's wearing it out in public when there's nobody around, which doesn't show much about him. So in addition to feeling bad about the Lillian Simmons bit, he also feels bad about this. He said, I'm one of those yellow guys. I try not to show it, but I am. So by yellow, he means chicken, right? Like he's not tough, he's not willing to stand up for himself. And he kind of imagines this whole scenario, and basically this is just making him feel worse about himself. Where if this guy stole his gloves, like he'd go down to his room and kind of confront him, but not really confront him. And it would say, he wouldn't really accuse the guy of stealing the gloves, but he'd go look in his closet, find the gloves, and then he'd ask the guy, so what are my gloves doing in your pocket? And then the guy would kind of say, are you saying I'm a thief? And he'd say, no, I'm not really that. But he said, if you're supposed to sock somebody in the jaw and you sort of feel like doing it, you should do it. I'm no good at it, though. I'd rather push a guy out a window or chop his head off with an axe than hit him in the jaw. Okay, so he's feeling bad with Lillian Simmons. He's feeling like a wuss after this, and then this leads to prostitute scene. Now, if you go forward to 92, 93, he's also, in addition to feeling bad about Lillian Simmons, feeling like a chicken, now, and the issue of sex is coming up again, and he realizes that this is something he hasn't done, and so this feeds into feeling not tough, feeling into the badness that he felt from Lillian Simmons, and I think all these things kind of come together to show where he's at, which leads into the prostitute scene. On 94, 95, this is a pretty depressing scene, really. And I think that you could read the scene a couple different ways. I mean, I think the fact that he doesn't follow through with when the prostitute shows up, I think I would argue that that shows a maturity in him. For someone who's kind of in this balancing point between being mature and being immature. And usually, since since there was so much set up of that in the beginning, I mean, there was a lot of stuff in the beginning about he's not get old and not young and all that stuff. He's got to grow up some by the end, right? This is what's called a little bit of a Bildungsroman novel, where a character starts more innocent or young and then ends up older and wiser. He does a little bit anyway. Or you could also read this as him being pretty immature for not going through with it. But the things he talks about, which I think would demonstrate maturity, she was very nervous for a prostitute. She really was. I think it was because she was young as hell. She was around my age. I sat down in the big chair next to her and offered her a cigarette. I don't smoke. She had a teeny little weeny-whiny voice. You could hardly hear her. She never said thank you either when you offered her something. Then she goes on and asks him how old he is, and he says, me, 22. Like fun you are. It's a funny thing to say. It sounded like a real kid. You'd think a prostitute would say like hell you are, cut the crap instead of like fun you are. So at this point, he's starting to decide this is not a good idea. I think mostly because she's young, right? And this isn't what he's interested in. And then the thing he does want to do, which has come up over and over and over, all the times of people he's wanted to give a buzz and people he's wanted to talk to, is he wants to talk. And he says on 95, sexy was about the last thing I was feeling. I was feeling much more depressed than sexy. And he said, hey, don't you feel like talking for a while? I asked her. It was a childish thing to say, but I was feeling so damn peculiar. Are you in a very big hurry? She looked at me like I was a madman. What the heck do you want to talk about, she said. Sounds like she's from Fargo. What the heck do you want to talk about, huh? I don't know, nothing special. I just thought perhaps you might care to chat for a little bit. And he goes on and down a little bit. I couldn't think of anything to talk about, though. I thought of asking her about how she got to be a prostitute and all, but I was scared to ask her. She probably wouldn't have told me anyway. So I think that you could point to this as a scene that shows that he is maturing or a more mature person. The fact that he doesn't go through with it. Then on page 98, we get more of the stuff he needs to talk. So after this really depressing scene, the first thing he does is he needs to talk. After old Sonny was gone, I sat in the chair for a while and smoked a couple cigarettes. It was getting daylight outside. Boy, I felt miserable. I felt so depressed you can't imagine. What I did, I started talking, sort of out loud to Allie. I do that sometimes when I get very depressed. I keep telling him to go home and get his bike and meet me in front of Bobby Fallon's house. So I think, as we've seen here, the times where he does talk to people, like when he talked to the cab driver about the ducks, and when he's talking to Mr. Spencer, and as he talks to other characters later, he moves in a positive direction, right? It's something important for him. At the points where he can't talk or refuses to or doesn't feel in the mood to give someone a buzz or to talk to them, usually he ends up feeling much worse and more depressed. Okay, so if you're looking for, an author puts all those little bits in there. And so to come to the conclusion of what point author's making by telling this, and therefore, if you're thinking for the argument for your paper about what does the book argue for, you look at the things which positively impact Holden's life and the things that negatively do, and then you draw some conclusions about what point author's getting at. Okay? Going on, then, so he's in this room, and Maurice from the elevator comes in and makes him feel like a little kid, punches him, and he also, on page 103, then what he did, he snapped his finger very hard on my pajamas. I won't tell you where he snapped it, but it hurt like hell. I told him he was a dirty moron, and then he got punched and beat up again. Holden's having a rough time, and then he goes into this kind of imaginary movie mode. On page 104, after he got punched, the movies, they can ruin you, I'm not kidding. I stayed in the bathroom for about an hour, taking a bath and all. Then I got back in bed. It took me quite a while to get to sleep. I wasn't even tired, but I finally did. What I really felt like, though, was committing suicide. I felt like jumping out of the window. I probably would have done it, too, if I'd been sure somebody'd cover me up as soon as I landed. I didn't want a bunch of stupid rubbernecks looking at me when I was all gory. I want you to remember that bit, because this idea comes up again, and For someone who is having these feelings, the most important thing he could do is talk, right? And I think he's right in all the times that he wants to, even if he can't. That's something that needs to be talked about, right? So we will get into that on Monday. So I think I had the sub have you read up to 130, whatever it says on the lesson plan for today. So anyway, I'm hopeful to be back Monday. I'm hopeful my kid is doing better by Monday, and we'll be in touch then. So have a good weekend.